Russia is said to be reeling from the unprecedented and audacious drone attacks by Ukraine. Ukraine hit multiple air bases deep inside Russia in what they're calling Operation Spiderweb. Ukrainian officials say that dozens of Russian warplanes were wiped out by the drones that had been smuggled into Russia and hidden on trucks. There is a new round of peace talks between Ukraine and Russia just getting underway in Turkey. So it's an interesting backdrop, these drone attacks. Let's get right to CNN Chief International Security Correspondent Nick Payton-Walsh for the latest on all this. Nick.
Yeah, extraordinary how deep inside Russia this daring, sophisticated Ukrainian attack took place, hitting an airfield halfway across Russian Siberia at one point and up near the Arctic Circle too. These 117 drones, Ukraine security services say, hidden inside wooden mobile homes, the roofs of which seem to have slid off, releasing this cloud of attack drones. Video, in fact, showing how they flew over Russia's Tupolev 94 propeller-driven strategic long-range bombers, essentially what Moscow uses to wreak havoc across Ukraine civilian targets every single night, taking out one by one. Now, Ukraine says it destroyed 41 aircraft, including a kind of AWACS-style A-50 aircraft. But really, I think some of the bigger damage here is to Russian military pride, the sense that these valuable aircraft, whose loss may prove a significant problem for their war effort, were somehow impregnable, hidden deep inside of Russia, and that again, we're seeing Ukraine use extraordinary ingenuity. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, saying this took a year and a half worth of planning, and indeed that everyone involved in that planning had left the country before the attack happened. That kind of technological advance being used to strike a heart at the Russian military beast that likes to portray itself as being impregnable. Here's what President Zelensky had to say at a summit with his European allies in Vilnius earlier today about the attacks.
Europe, together with America, has better weapons than Russia. We also have stronger tactical solutions. Our Operation Spiderweb yesterday proved that. Russia must feel what its losses mean. That is what will push it toward diplomacy. And when Russia takes losses in this war, it's obvious to everyone that Ukraine is the one holding the line, not just for itself, but for all of Europe.
Now, you could see Zelensky arriving in Vilnius, a bit of a spring in his step, really. This is a much-needed boost to Ukrainian morale after months of exceptionally bad news, not only diplomatically, but on the front lines as well. And he's making a point there, I think, which will be welcomed and agreed with by all of his European allies in the room, but somewhat different to the Trump administration's approach, who seem to feel the better their relationship with Moscow is, the more likely peace is. Zelensky, with his European allies, think you have to inflict this sort of military damage on Russia to make it think it can't exist in this war indefinitely. We'll have to see, though, what these hugely embarrassing strikes do for Russian morale, Russian planning inside the Kremlin, and also, too, for its war effort, John.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary operation. I guess one question is it repeatable? Could Ukraine do it again in short order if it wanted to? These are all some of the things we'll be watching. Nick Payton-Walsh, thank you very much. Kate?
And all of this, as John said, happening as they're heading back to Ukraine and Russia for another round of potential peace talks today. Joining us right now, CNN Global Affairs commentator, former Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh, and CNN military analyst, retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. It's good to see you both. Colonel, let's start with what's happening as we speak, which is talks are about to get underway in Istanbul between Ukraine and Russia. Low expectations from everything I've seen going into these talks as they get underway. Do these unprecedented Ukraine attacks inside Russia, do you think, help, hurt, or have no impact on the direction that these talks are headed?
Yeah, Kate, good morning. I think in some ways they will help the Ukrainian position because the Ukrainians have proven once again that they actually do hold some cards when it comes to this fight with Russia. And, any other evidence to the contrary indicates that the Ukrainians have certain unconventional capabilities, and the Russians are definitely noticing those capabilities. The one thing that you have to consider, though, is that the Russians may see this as an excuse to mount counterattacks of their own, and that could very well stall out any peace talk efforts or ceasefire talk efforts at this particular juncture.
Yeah, and Sabrina, I mean, the positions going into these talks, though they're supposed to be trading conditions, if you will, they really are quite well known. Ukraine wants a ceasefire first before moving to negotiate a broader peace deal. Russia seems uninterested in anything temporary in terms of a ceasefire and continues to say it wants to discuss the root causes of the war, which is their way of saying they want to discuss, the just mere existence of Ukraine as a sovereign state. Is this a show today? I mean, I don't want to be overly pessimistic or cynical here. Talking is always better than not. But what do you think?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, having both sides come to the table and meet and to discuss this war and potentially discuss a close, that is a good thing. You want to see engagement. But I think what Ukraine showed overnight is the fact that they have this cheaper drone technology that was able to inflict incredible damages, probably in the millions to billions of dollars on Russia's long-term strategic weapons capability. And at the end of the day, Russia is at the table and going to have to think about how long they're willing to continue to send their soldiers into, what's becoming a meat grinder of this war, and basically where the lines are basically stagnant, while potentially a third of their military air force has been wiped out. So it is a good thing that these conversations are happening. Ukraine has showed time and time again that they're serious about negotiating an end to this war. But what remains an outstanding question is Putin really serious about that?
That's exactly right. And Colonel, the Politico described this operation as Russia's Pearl Harbor. And I think the way Nick Payton Walsh was kind of characterizing it is an important one, which is there is real damage that is apparent to Russian military aircraft. That's no question. But NPW says maybe the more damage was actually done, bigger damage to Russia's military pride. I mean, how big was this from your perspective?
That was very big, Kate. And one of the things to keep in mind is that for each Tu-95 bomber, it has a capacity to carry 8 cruise missiles. So what the Ukrainians did was every single bomber that they were able to basically eliminate or damage in an irreparable way, that is something where they are basically securing their own airspace, their own civilian population. So what the Ukrainians did was incredibly ingenious, and it did impact Russian military pride. There are Russian social media posts where you see Russian soldiers basically saying, "Hey, we really screwed up here. We were not watching what could happen here." So the Russians are definitely on the back foot when it comes to this, and it's definitely showing in the types of activity that you see among Russian military bloggers, as well as the Russian media. So they're hoping for a major Russian response. Whether or not Russia can really mount that, because the cost equivalent, as Sabrina mentioned, is really quite something. This is basically asymmetric warfare at its finest, and this is what the Ukrainians have basically put on the table here. They can do this, even though they're the smaller country. They can inflict significant damage on the Russians, and that damage could potentially stop the Russian war effort if it continues.
And Sabrina, you're getting at this, but the question then becomes, does any one operation as big as it is, does it hurt Russia, i.e. Putin, enough to have him rethinking his approach? Because at the same time, I have consistently heard lawmakers and those kind of in the space talking about how this bipartisan sanctions bill that's moving through the Senate, being spearheaded by Lindsey Graham and Senator Blumenthal, they see this maybe, a lot of people seeing this as really maybe the only way to get Putin to rethink anything. I mean, what do you think?
I think Putin has made his decisions pretty clear. He wants to continue this war as long as possible. And, many of his people that serve in his government have also said the same thing. But it is really the cost. How much is this going to continue to cost men and women being expended on the battlefield? I mean, he's had to turn to the North Koreans for more bodies to literally put on the battlefield. So I think it's a calculation of how much more is this going to cost. And then looking at this, this spider web operation that the Ukrainians launched last night or over the weekend, how much damage is that going to inflict in the long term? I mean, these are aircraft that are not easily replaceable. They're Soviet-era aircraft that are incredibly costly to replace. And what the Ukrainians did was use these cheap, very effective drone technology to potentially wipe out a third of the fleet. So, today, as this administration is also getting briefed on what the Ukrainians did over the weekend, this is really an indication of where modern warfare is going, using this cheaper drone technology to take out what was is Europe's, one of their largest militaries, a third of their aircraft. I mean, that sends an incredible message, not just to Russia, but I think, European allies and to the United States as well, about this capability that the Ukrainians have developed.
Yeah, it's good to see you both. Thank you so much for coming on.